Okay, hello everybody. It's Peter here from AJS, also representing G&A Warburtons from New Zealand. Welcome once again to another online demonstration, and this week we're taking you somewhere into a jeweler's workshop somewhere in Australasia, and this week we're going across the continent to Geraldton and to see Penny there. Hi Penny, how are you?
Hi everyone, how are you? Hi Peter.
Great to have you back on board, Penny.
Nice to be back.
Indeed. And today we're discussing soldering, and you're going to show us different ways to solder. Would you just like to elaborate on a bit about what you're going to get up to, Penny?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I just I thought maybe I know when I'm teaching some of my workshops that people struggle the most with soldering. So I thought maybe if I just went over some soldering techniques and talked about solder and the products and the utensils and tools that we use when soldering, that might help somebody out there, I hope. So I'm going to start with what solder is. I've got my notes here, so I'm just glancing at my notes to make sure I get everything right. I don't want to give out any wrong information.
Cool.
So solder is a non-ferrous metal alloy, and the major percentage of which is usually the same metal that's being joined. So I'm going to be working with silver, sterling silver today, and I'm going to do a little demo on some copper. I've just got a little message on my screen. And but I'm going to use the silver solder for my copper demonstration as well. So a solder comes in a couple of different forms, one of which is sheet. That's my choice mostly. Wire, you can buy already pre-cut solder into pallions, and it also comes in a paste form, and the paste form is in a syringe, and it's a mixture of, I'm not sure which one you want to look at.
Yeah, I can show that one there for you. Yeah. It's
a mixture of solder and flux together. So the sheet you buy, I guess, by the gram. I buy, you can get that from HAS as well, and you buy by the gram, and you can get it comes in different lengths, and then you cut up from there. So all solder comes in 3 different melting points or flows. So it comes in hard, medium, and easy. And the melting temperatures are determined by the zinc that's in the solder. And we have the 3 different types of melting points because your piece needs to be evenly heated for the solder to flow, because solder flows towards heat. So we need to have the whole piece heated up evenly so that it'll flow straight to our join and not to any other part of our piece of jewelry. So hard needs the most amount of temperature for it to flow. So you need to get your piece quite warm for the hard solder to flow. Medium, a little less heat. Easy, even less heat again. So like I sort of said, the 3 different temperatures, we use those. So if you were soldering on a complicated piece of jewelry, or a piece of jewelry that has multiple components to it, because the whole piece has to be evenly heated. If you're using hard, and you make your solder flow, and then you go to solder on your second component, if you have to heat the piece up to the same temperature that you heated it up the first time around, potentially by the time you get hot enough for the second piece to solder or join to your the piece that you're working on, the initial piece you soldered on could potentially fall off or unsolder. So you need to stagger your solders using less heat so that none of these components come off as you're making your piece of jewelry. I hope that is clear.
Yeah, it makes sense. So start with hard solder.
Yes.
And then medium or easy next time, just depending on how many you're going to be doing, I assume.
Correct, yeah. And as you get better at your soldering, and I guess it also depends, if the pieces that you're soldering are very close together, and as you get better at your soldering, you can, you don't have to sort of go hard, then medium, then easy, because if you're soldering more than 3 components onto your jewelry, where do you go from there, obviously? But you can solder hard and then hard, and in medium and then medium, but it takes a little bit of skill and torch and heat control to be able to do that. So that just comes with time and practice. And, you know, a lot of the time I only just work with medium. You know, some people may say that that's not the right thing to do. Other people may agree with me, but that's what I do. And I will only move down to easy if I really feel that I have to, that I really feel like all the pieces that I've already soldered on, it's a little risky that by the time I heat the whole piece up, that things are going to start falling out of place or moving, then I'll use easy. There's other little tricks that you can do to help things from soldering. We can use liquid paper to coat the solder join that you've already done, or the piece that's already been soldered on. That's a pretty flammable chemical though, and it's not always recommended. You can use heat protectants as well, and ochre. You can make a paste out of ochre and use that too. So the three different types of ways to solder, the three titles, I guess, are sweat solder, so that's surface to surface, strip, so that's edge to surface, and butt, which is edge to edge. So they're the three different types of solder joints. So a sweat solder, you flow some solder on one piece of metal, and then you and when I say flow, you just kind of I'll demonstrate in a minute, but that you just flow a little bit of solder and then you put that piece onto the second piece and solder them together that way. A strip is predominantly used for soldering a bezel onto a flat surface, and butt is usually, say, for when you're making a ring. And I'm going to demonstrate all three as well of those types of soldered joints. But another product that you need really importantly is flux. If you don't have flux, it helps to keep the oxidization down and helps to keep the piece clean. And flux comes in a couple of different forms as well. I already buy, again, from HAS, a pre-fabricated flux, but you can use, and that paste is a paste, which is a water-based compound and contains borax and boric acid. You can use a liquid flux, that's a spray. I personally haven't used that, but I'm quite intrigued by it and would like to maybe give it a go one time. If anybody's used liquid flux out there, please put a comment, let me know what you think, what your results have been with using liquid flux. It's something that I've not used before. And the other one that you can use is a borax cone, and that does literally come in the shape of a cone, and you would have a porcelain dish and you grind the cone in the porcelain dish and add a little bit of water there until you make a paste. So therefore it's very similar to the prefabricated paste that I would already buy myself. So the piece must be coated, the join must be coated in flux so that it helps to keep, as I say, oxidization down and keep the piece clean. Without flux, the solder won't flow. And I would like to also point out that a line that I say over and over again is that solder is a joiner, it is not a filler. So to make sure that you get a very precise and a really great solder flow, you need a couple of things to happen, and that is that you need the fit to be as tight as possible. Metal touching metal, no light shining through at all. You know, so if you're doing a ring join, if it's a butt to butt, you know, holding it up to make sure that you can't see any light shining through at all, that join is as tight as it possibly can be. And then cleanliness is also another really important thing. If your flux is dirty, if your piece is dirty, then it won't flow either. So we need to keep everything as clean as possible. Having said that, I'm not very pedantic about keeping my pieces very clean. Again, I've never really had any real luck, but then if I think back to those times that maybe my solder hasn't flowed, could it have been because I had been trying to rush and not worried too much about the cleanliness? So another really cool little line that I picked up while I was doing all the research for this presentation was, I'll say this here that I've written down: solder flows by capillary action. The narrower the joint, the more effectively the solder will flow. So again, that just points out the fact that it must be metal touching metal. There must be no gaps, no light shining through. But that is just trying to think of different ways to make it easier for people to understand how tight and what needs to happen for everything to flow perfectly for us. So I hope that sort of all makes sense. Couple of key points. Solder flows towards heat. Your piece must be evenly heated. Solder is not a joiner. It is, is a joiner. It's not a filler. We're not there to fill gaps. So if you do have some light shining through, there's no point in just puddling more and more solder in there, because as soon as you go to make the ring or, put any pressure on anything, there's no metal touching metal. It's just solder floating in there, and potentially the piece will either come off or fall apart. All right, so shall I crank up the torch? Let's do that.
Sounds great. Good introduction there, Penny. Thank you.
My setup that I have, I've got the little Smith torch. It's my torch of choice, propane and oxygen. And I always just have my little flux pot and a brush to brush my flux on. My solder, it all comes in the same big long strip, so I cut mine up into smaller pieces, and then I write on M, H or E, so I know what is what, because you can't really tell by looking at them. Some places do have little emblems already imprinted into the solder, but these ones that I have at the moment don't. And as I say, the flux and paste, I only really ever use the medium. And I should point out that the paste, I really only use it for things like jump rings, soldering jump rings together. There's a real love-hate relationship with paste. Some people love it, other people hate it. So I like it. I'm not going to say that I super duper love it. I don't use it to join rings. I don't use it for any major joins or anything, but I do love using it for soldering jump rings, and I do use it for soldering my bezel onto a plate. So the other things that I might have to use while I'm soldering is some tweezers, and the pick that I use is a titanium pick, so I can get that quite hot when I'm picking up pieces of solder and moving things around. I've got a heat-resistant plate here. I've also got a little fire brick. I build sort of all sorts of levels and stages. I like the brick because I can put things like, these are actually quilting pins, so I can actually stab that into the brick and use it to prop things up against jewelry if I'm, trying to stack things on top. You can use a charcoal brick as well. That also is great for helping to control heat exactly where you want it to without it escaping too much away. So I thought maybe if I just started, I've got examples of the 3 types of soldered joins. So I might start with the sweat solder. It's not one that I do a lot of, and hopefully I can demonstrate this for you correctly today. So when I go to cut my strip of solder, using some nice strong scissors. I'm sure there's probably tools out there that are called solder cutting scissors or something, but whatever can cut through. It's not very difficult to cut through. I cut long strips into my solder. You might be able to see they're just like little strips there. And then I'm holding my finger against the end so that they don't ping off everywhere. Tiny little, they're called pallions, or pieces, I guess you could call them. Mm-hmm. These ones that I've cut are actually quite big, but I'll pick a couple up so that you can see. Hopefully you can see, you might not be able to see in the palm of my hand, but they're tiny.
Yeah,
tiny.
We can see it.
Yep. So we call those pallions. So what I'm going to do, I'm just using copper just so that I'm not wasting any of my silver. I'm just going to use some copper to demonstrate the sweat solder. So I want to solder this piece onto this piece. Often I use sweat soldering, a piece of jewelry that I make. I wind and twist wire into a pattern, and then I solder it onto a plate. So I would use sweat soldering in that situation. So if this is my the top piece and this is the bottom piece, I'm going to put solder onto the top piece. So I'm actually going to paint some flux on there, a little bit of water in my flux, and I'm going to paint that all over my piece that I'm going to solder. And if you're struggling to get your flux to stay on the metal, maybe the metal's a little shiny and you might just need to give it a little bit of a rough up with some sandpaper, and then it'll sort of stick to your piece of metal a little better. So I'm going to take, I like to make balls out of my solder that I just find it a little bit easier to pick up, and I also just heat my flux up a little bit so that my balls will stick in place. It's probably not such a big issue while I'm doing a sweat solder, but when I show something else, I do that. But one, it probably will make more sense. I'm just going to heat that up a little bit till it goes a bit sort of sticky. So once it's looking a bit sort of glassy almost and a bit sticky, I'm going to take some of these little solder chips now, or pallions, and turn them into little balls and use my pick to place it onto my piece of work. It comes from my pick. Okay. You could just pick up your little pieces of your little pallions and pop them straight on without making the balls, but this is the way I like to do it.
So will you be joining the two pieces just in certain areas? Is that what you're doing? Or
what was that, sorry?
Will you be joining the two pieces of metal just in specific areas? Or
yeah, for the demonstration, I'm just like putting one piece on top of the other.
Yeah.
Nothing terribly fancy.
And then that solder, will that spread across the whole entirety of that metal?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got quite a big piece here to demonstrate.
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna, I might just put another little bit up in the corner there. Yeah, so you can, I've got that one there just without making a ball. Now, so I'm just gonna heat up like I was saying, this whole piece has to be evenly heated up. And I'll point out too on the torch, I'm just gonna take a little bit. So out here is not very hot. Touching in here is not very hot. The sweet spot is about there. So that's where I need the torch to be touching my metal. So I'm just going to evenly heat up this piece, and I'm just going to make this solder run a little for me. So the solder goes bright silver, and it almost starts to, there it goes, like quiver or shiver, I guess, and then it just flows. And the piece that I'm using is, the solder that I'm using is medium, I should point out. Oh, here's my piece here. And I'm going to put some flux on here. This is super hot. Before I put that down, I might like to just heat this a little bit, this other second piece up a little bit. Where I've got my camera situated, I have a little magnet for my torch, and normally I would put my torch on the magnet so that I have my other hand to perhaps help me, but I'm not game enough to put it on my magnet in case it's too close to my phone. So I'm just trying to hang on to it. So now the solder is facing down against the other plate, and I'm just going to heat the whole piece. Now, while it's on the brick, it could be a little bit tricky to get the heat that I'm after. So another tip that you could do is using your third arm and a piece of mesh. You could place that into your third arm tweezers and then lay this on top of the mesh, and then I can heat from underneath, and that way then I'll be able to get a little bit better heat to the whole piece. and get the solder to flow. So I'm just trying to watch. As I say, I'm doing quite a big piece here for the demonstration, and as the whole piece gets hot enough and the solder starts to flow again, the piece will it's just starting to move down a little now as the solder flows between the two pieces. And it takes, again, like everything when it comes to, well, everything in life really, you know, it takes practice to know how much solder to use as well, because if you have too much solder and it all flows out, then you've got quite a bit of solder to clean up. So you just, you know, you don't want to have an excess of solder and have massive cleanup, but you have to have enough solder that the two pieces will join. So some of that solder has flowed, but not all of it. I can see the pieces still wobbling around. And I may have to take this up and put it onto my onto the mesh in the third arm so that I can get underneath it to get the heat properly. This is not a very exciting solder join because you can't see anything happening because the solder's sandwiched between the two pieces of metal. I can see some of it's run out the side there.
So what's the sign to you that you've done enough?
Usually I can see that the top piece will just sort of move a little like that, and then it'll just like sink happily into place.
Okay.
So I'm not going to worry too much about that anymore because that's just, yeah, that hasn't quite soldered on top there. But what you would do is, I'm just going to pop that down there because I think I would get better results if I set up the, this is what I was talking about, the tweezers in the mesh, and then I can put the piece on top and then I can heat underneath and get better heat to the piece that way. But sweat soldering is not something that I use a lot. So somebody else might, again, have some comments in the feedback about other ways to use sweat soldering, but it's just soldering surface to surface. And like I say, it takes a little bit of practice to work out how much to not use too much. We don't want lots of solder flowing out. But so that's one form of soldering called sweat soldering. Not that we really saw those two pieces soldered together, but hopefully you've kind of got the gist of what that was.
We've got the concept. Yep, indeed. Thank you very much, Penny.
All right, so what I'm going to do now is a butt solder, which is, I'm just going to quickly turn this strip of metal that I've already annealed and bring the ends around for a butt solder, edge to edge. So I'm just going to bend this around. So as I was saying before, you want these edges to be as tight as possible so that there's no light shining through. So
this would be quite a common joining.
Yes, this is probably this one, and the next two is the two solder techniques that I use most commonly every day that I'm making jewelry. So
yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say that the sweat soldering is just something that I don't do very much in my jewelry making. You know, there's probably other people out there that are going to be saying, "Oh my gosh, that's a technique that I use every day. That's something that is very familiar to me." And they may even have some other tips that they can pop in the comments that can help for people to understand the concepts more than what I've demonstrated today. It's just that it's not a technique that I use very much in my jewelry making. Like I say, I have that one sort of little collection that I do where I use the wire on the sheet. So I just keep running my fingers over the top to make sure that I haven't got anything higher than the other, and making sure that it's nice and flush. And looking through, I can see no light shining through that join, so the two edges touching each other as tight as I can possibly get it. So now I do like to use my tweezers when I do these, when I'm making a ring and I'm doing an edge to edge join. Again, I just have a little like a little checklist that I do all the time and try to follow that so that I don't miss any steps. So once I've got it into the tweezers, and I don't want it too far down into the tweezers because they will pull heat as well. So then I'm going to flux my join. And people often ask me, can I use too much flux? I don't think that you can use too much flux unless you can't see what you're working on, but you can definitely not have enough. If you don't have enough flux, then the solder won't join, and you can burn your flux off as well. So you really got to make sure that if something is not working, if something is not flowing, just think back about the general steps of what you want to follow to solder, and perhaps in the process trying to get the solder to flow, you've burnt off all the flux. So the best step to do then is to restart, pickle the item and clean it and start again. So I've got my flux in place. The next thing I always like to do is make sure that I have some solder ready to go. And again, I'm going to use the sheet that I've already cut into the little pallions, like I showed you earlier, into the little chips. Yes, I'm going to use the little chips again. I'm going to use 3, which is probably more than enough. I've got one that's a wee tiny one and a couple that are sort of medium sort of sizes. I'm just going to go with that today, and I'm going to use 3. I'm going to place one at the back, one in the middle, and one at the front. Again, you know, there's probably people out there saying too much solder, but anyway, that's what I'm going to do today. So we're going to just light up my torch. I'll start with the propane feed in the oxygen. So I've got a bush on my flame of about that size. So just like what I was demonstrating with the sweat solder, I'm going to just heat up my flux a little bit to make it a little sticky or tacky so that my solder will stay in place. Lots of people just place the little pallions in place right now before they heat the flux up, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, but often because of the water content in the paste in your flux, the little pieces that you've just so ever carefully placed in the right spot may have moved. So where possible, I try not to make things very frustrating. So I just found that heating up my flux to make it a little bit sticky helps to make my solder fit and stay where I want it to. So I'm going to make balls again because I like doing it that way. Pick it up with my pick and I'm going to place it on the join one at the back, a little bit of heat to get it off my pick, keeping an eye on my ring that I don't hold the heat too long on the silver and cause the silver to melt on me. One in the middle, and then one at the front. Now, this doesn't have to be done on a butt join. Is not always just about rings. It could be just 2 edges that you've joined together. That's all butt joining is. It's just 2 edges touching each other as long as those edges are nice and tight. So for me to solder the ring, I'm just going to heat, because as I've said, the whole piece must be warm. So I'm just going to evenly heat it. I'm going to just run my torch across the top until I see some heat. I call it chasing across the top of the ring, bring it underneath, keeping my torch moving. I'm watching the solder to see it go bright silver. As it starts to flow, I'm going to come inside and just almost tease the solder, keeping my torch moving until the solder evenly heating both sides, the whole ring, until the solder just getting ready to flow. I'm just going to bring some heat underneath again, and there it goes. So like I was saying before, turn my torch off. Like I was saying before, I love that sentence about, I'll read it again so that I don't read it out incorrectly, about solder flows by capillary action. The narrower the join, the more effectively the solder will flow. So the closer it is, the more effectively it will flow. So holding on to my holding on to my ring before I open up the torch, and then the solder is flowed right through, joining the 2 ends together. I've got my pickle pot here. Use my copper tongs to pop it in the pickle pot to clean up all the oxidization. So that's an edge, a butt join, 2 edges together. Like I said, doesn't have to be in a ring. It could be just simply 2 pieces of metal that you're bringing together to solder together. The last one that I'll do is the strip. edge to surface. So while the wet soldering is surface to surface, so two flat pieces that you're soldering together, this is an edge of a metal onto a flat piece. So for that, I'm going to demonstrate a little bezel soldering. I'm going to solder the bezel. I've already prepared the bezel. I've got that nice and flush. I've got my sheet here all nice flush, ready to go. It sits nice and tightly on that piece of metal. I am going to use the mesh and my tweezers to do this one. And I'm also going to use, my third arm's got a bit. This time I'm going to use the paste. I like to use the paste when I do my bezels or my edge to surface.
Can we just lift the mobile phone a little bit, do you think?
A little bit higher?
Yeah, perfect.
How's that?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so with the solder and paste, solder and flux in the syringe already mixed together, I'm just going to carefully place some solder on the inside of my bezel strip all the way around.
So the paste allows you to be quite precise.
Yeah, and that's why it's brilliant for jump rings. Like if you can imagine using those tiny little pieces of pallions to place on a little jump ring to solder, it's very fiddly, very time consuming. Whereas with the solder, the paste, I can have my chain laid out here on my little jump rings that I'm going to solder all interlinked, all ready to go. I can place a tiny little piece onto the join, and then I can heat that up, and then I can move along to the next jump ring. You can't use the tip like a pick. You can't touch the flame with the tip of the syringe, because if you heat up the solder in the syringe in this piece here, then it will actually flow, and then you can't get any out, and it'll all be all soldered all up inside there. Why do I know this? Through experience. So once I've kind of got a little bit of heat there, I'm going to come underneath now, and I'm going to heat. I haven't got a really big piece of, like, not very much overhanging silver from my bezel, so I'm just heating up all of the silver. The last thing I'm going to do is focus on the actual bezel itself, heating it all up. Come back up in here, go inside, around the outside, just keeping my flame moving all the time, and it's just getting ready. It's just starting to flow. There it goes. And the outside a little bit there. So that all flowed. I also do find that the paste flows a lot quicker as well, maybe because you're just using small amounts. Pick him up off there, bring him out to the edge, I think. Quench that. And then, and I don't know if you can see that there. I just find when I'm using the paste that I don't have as much mess with my solder. I can control it a little bit more when I'm doing the bezel setting, so that I haven't got lots and lots of cleanup. There's still cleanup to be done, of course. There's always cleanup to be done. Pop that into the pickle pot to clean that up. My ring is now, I could probably sit there a little bit longer, but just used some bicarbonate soda and water to rinse the pickle off after it comes out of the pickle pot. That just neutralizes the pickle. And yeah, quite clearly that's probably way too much solder. It's come right through, but that butt joint is well and truly soldered.
Just a bit lower if you can, Penny, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
How's that? So that's like the three techniques of soldering. So I've talked about the solder, the melting temperatures, the flux, some of the other equipment and tools that we use in soldering. And really, it just comes with practice, learning what the solder looks like when it's getting ready to solder. So when I know with some students that I have, or people that come to do workshops with me, the two things that happen when they're soldering is they get super excited when they start to see the solder flow and they take the heat off. You have to make sure that the solder is completely flowed in the area that you want it to flow to before you take the heat away.
You've got to allow that capillary action to work, eh?
That's right.
Yes.
And then the other problem is that when people see the solder flow, they leave the torch on there, and we don't want to melt the item. So once it's flowed, it's flowed. It's not going to flow any further. It's not going to do any more. The potential to melt your piece is higher though. So once it's flowed, take it away. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think I covered everything that I wanted to talk about. Hopefully, there was something out there that somebody may have picked up.
Well, I'm sure you've helped people now and in the future, Penny. And Dawn's made a comment. I love working with paste, but have never done bezels with it. Yay, says Penny.
Oh, yay.
Yay, says Dawn. Thanks, Penny, is what she said. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yes. It's the only way that I do bezels. I love doing the bezels with the solder paste because I just have so much more control. I'll see if this one's out of the pickle pot ready to see now. Because I also, it probably needs to stay in there a little bit longer, really, so that you can see it properly. But I just love the cleanup part of it as well. I just find I'm nowhere near as messy with the paste in a bezel than what I am with the pallions. But like I say, there's going to be people out there that are going to disagree with me a lot about the paste. But, you just got to choose what works for you.
So the paste sounds a bit like the Collingwood football team, really, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it is the Collingwood team of the salt jewelry world.
Love them or hate them. Okay, so Dawn, I'll invite you if you've got any other comments or questions to let me know, or any other people watching. Otherwise, we'll give it a wrap there. Is there any other common mistakes people make in soldering, Penny?
Mistakes. I think those last two, I know for me, they take the heat away or leave the heat on for too long. Don't heat the piece evenly. That's really important. The piece just has to be heated up evenly for the solder to flow. And like I said, I actually have a steps to solder on my wall, blue tacked here, so that I know each step. So if I get really frustrated and something is not working for me, I can have a quick glance at the steps and say, what have I missed? What is not working? For some reason today I forgot to put some flux on. If the flux isn't there, then it's not going to flow. If the piece isn't clean, it's not going to flow. So I think sometimes we just have to take it back to basics. And if it means that you make yourself a little list, a little tick off list, have I done this, this and this? This is why, then that may be why something's not working, because you've missed something out of that list. But yeah, otherwise, I don't think they're the main things. I think people not using flux, not using enough flux, not heating evenly. And, the first time you see solder flow, it's super exciting. And the first thing you do is take the torch away. So you've got to wait until it's flowed.
So it is a real art, isn't it? Because you've got to protect your piece. You've got to heat it, but protect it, because you don't want to destroy it in the whole process, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But I think sometimes you got to melt a piece to understand what it is that you don't want to do.
Yeah, you've got to learn where that line is, don't you?
Yeah. So, and look, I'll go back to when I first started making jewelry. I have a really super sweet husband, and he went and bought me a torch, but he knew nothing about jewelry making, and he bought me like a welder's torch. And so for ages, I learnt using, I'm not recommending that you do this, but the super heaviest torch in my hand, but I learnt to control heat really quickly. So I think, again, I've said it many times today, practice. If you've got some scrap, if it's copper, if it's silver, it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't matter what it is you're joining, or you don't even have to make anything. Just practice getting those edges tight and flush, and then practice soldering. And it's just through doing it over and over again that you learn what the solder looks like, how much heat you need. And even if you just grab some scrap silver and melt it and just see what happens, like see the color changes, see what the metal does as it gets hotter. And when it gets close to melting, you know, take the torch away, play with it. Like, don't be scared to make mistakes. And then as long as you learn from those mistakes, then you really can't go wrong. It really just comes down to practice and watching what happens. Just, you know, and like take notes. Oh, you know, when I did this, this happened, you know. So you know, I'm a big believer in, I always have notes when I'm doing these demos or anything, and I think that it's really important to make sure you've got those little reminders, little, you know, key points and tips that can help you. And then it becomes second nature then, and then before you know it, you're not looking at your notes anymore, or you know, referring back to your list, you're just doing it.
Great advice there, Penny. Thank you so much. Yeah, and practice with your scrap. You may as well make your mistakes on your scrap rather than a genuine commission that you're doing at the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have so many scrap boxes, you know, one for my copper, one for my brass, and I have about 3 different ones for my silver. You know, and I even keep little Ziploc bags and write the thickness of the metal on the outside of those bags. So I've got a little bag for my, you know, 0.8, a little bag for my 1 millimeter. And then, you know, because you just never know when you might need just the tiniest little bit of metal. And there's nothing worth rummaging through a big box trying to find, oh, what thickness is that, measuring this, measuring that, you know. And then I have a box which is full of like, because I cut out a lot of shapes. So that's kind of got all those weird sheets that have got shapes cut out of it. And they're usually the bits that I melt up to make little balls, or to make studs or discs or something like that. And then another little tub which has got longer pieces in it. So, I mean, I know that all sounds really time consuming at the time, but when it comes to looking for something when you need it, I know I can just go, oh, I just need I need a long thin piece and it needs to be 0.8 thick. Oh, here it is in this little bag, pull it out and there it is. So yeah, trying to keep everything organized and a bit in control, that makes it a little bit easier. Then you're not flustering and you're not trying to, you know, frantically find stuff.
Efficiency is the key. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, Penny, thank you so much for that introduction to the different soldering techniques today.
No
thank you, Dawn, for your comment there. And she's happy about learning about the paste with the bezels. So thank you for that. And Penny, we'll look forward to seeing you and our viewers again real soon.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for having me again. I always love doing these demos, and yeah, I hope somebody picked up something. And please leave comments to help me understand things like spray flux. So I learn from you guys as well, heaps. I always go back after these demos and read the comments and reach out to anybody. And so yeah, please give me info as well. We work together.
So to our viewers, if you're watching this in the future, please leave another comment. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much, Penny.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
See ya.